Congressman Gallagher, welcome. I was just saying I thought maybe you'd taken to your bed because Aaron Rodgers is going to the Jets. I mean, I'm glad to see you're up and about. And I began with Senator Fisher by pointing out that Nebraska isn't the worst Big Ten team. There's still Wisconsin. So it's good to have you.
Well, it's great to be welcomed in such fashion, Hugh. You know, I hate being late. I try and live my life on the Lombardi time principle. In truth, I was doing an interview in a van outside my house in pitch darkness, which went 5 minutes late. And then I sprinted back to my basement so as not to be late for you. But I wasted a minute waiting for you to call me on Skype, which is no longer how we operate. So it's a real logistical nightmare at the Gallagher home here in Green Bay, Wisconsin right now. It's very warm, though. I'll say that. It's
Mr. Chairman, we are constantly technologically advancing like the Chinese. And so you got to keep up with the chat GPT producer that I hired to replace Dwayne. But Chairman, let's get serious. I read the Adam Credo piece in the Free Beacon that quotes the big three: Jim Banks, Mike Waltz, Mike Gallagher. You're the three serious guys about China. And what the administration has told everyone, apparently including you, is not reassuring. What do we know about what the Chinese are doing in our skies?
Well, we're also called the Three Amigos, and we have kind of matching outfits, and we have a whole chant that we do together. Future Senator Jim Banks, though, so we're going to need someone to replenish our trio in the House. So if you have any candidates, I'd be interested. Here's the bottom line. I think there are a few questions that remain unanswered. Well, first, there is the first incident, which is the Chinese spy balloon incident, which is probably the most troubling. And now we have these three subsequent shoot downs, including one that transited over Wisconsin and was ultimately shot down over Lake Huron. For the latter three, the recovery effort is still underway. And until we recover the material, until we analyze it, we're not going to know where it came from or whether it was a spy balloon or some sort of other unidentified aerial phenomenon. Now, if it turns out that the subsequent three were from foreign adversaries, that would be a big deal. I mean, I've spoken with people at the highest level, and they understand that would be a big deal, particularly if it was revealed that these were all from China. But we don't have that information yet. For the first incident, I have not yet been satisfied with answers to basic questions such as, why didn't we shoot it down earlier? If we figured out how to shoot it down without risk of civilian casualties, why didn't we shoot it down? Why would we have known about it if it weren't for the intrepid reporting of the Montana Billings Gazette? Why am I learning about things as a member of the Intel Committee, Armed Services Committee, from the Montana Billings Gazette? Would the administration have revealed this to us, or would it let the balloon lazily drift over the United States so as not to imperil Secretary Blinken's visit to China? And finally, and perhaps what is unknowable, is whether the CCP and Xi Jinping intentionally timed this espionage effort with Secretary Blinken's visit to send a message to us, a message such as, here's what we can do to you and get away with, and you'll do nothing. So there's a lot of questions to you. I guess if I could add one more thing, we've had reports of UAPs for years. It's why Congress set up an office called AARO and forced the administration to take this issue seriously. Now, I know a lot of people dismiss it because it instantly becomes a talk about aliens. But here's the reality. Things are showing up on our training ranges. They're fouling our ranges. Like the ranges our pilots fly around to train on, and we don't know what they are. If for no other reason than we want our pilots to be safe, that's a problem. And these latter three incidents may reveal that this stuff is happening at a scale that we didn't understand before because we have no process for detecting and neutralizing these things when they appear on our ranges.
Chairman, are you surprised that we do not have the ability to net these? And by that, I mean, I'm not talking about Wile E. Coyote and Acme Inc. and the devices that go wrong. But when we wanted the Soviet submarine that sunk, Howard Hughes built the Glomar Explorer in 1971. It deployed in 1973, and we had a Soviet submarine in 1974. In 3 years, we went from, hey, we got to get that, to having it and grabbing it. How can we not be able to grab a balloon? It's a balloon.
initially the suggestion was that, well, these are too high altitude in order to net and grab it, to which I suggest we'll bring it down to a lower altitude. But the first one I think was at 60,000 feet or less. So that shouldn't pose an issue. So this should be that kind of Apollo 13 moment where you lock all the nerds in a room and say, if we don't have this capability already, we better darn well develop it, because this won't be the last time we're dealing with things like this. And indeed, the best option would be for us to gain control of it without destroying it, so we can grab it, look under the hood, see what's going on, reverse engineer technology if we wanted to do that, or use it for the purpose of educating the American people as to what we're facing in the Chinese Communist Party. There are times, of course, Hugh, when we need to err on the side of secrecy, particularly when you're dealing with sensitive sources and methods. But I think now is a time that demands transparency. I think once the Pentagon and the FBI and the intelligence community are finished analyzing the debris that we've recovered off the coast of the Carolinas, I think they should put that thing on display. I think they should take it on a tour of the United States and say, here's what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to us. They have no respect for our sovereignty. They're flying balloons over the continental United States. This is who we're dealing with in the CCP. And don't believe, all this, don't believe the charm offensive that we've seen in recent weeks from the CCP.
Chairman Gallagher, there's a specific claim that has been made that I'd like you to speak to, and I'm not going to comment on it. I want to hear you speak to it, which is not to worry. They've got satellites. They get to see it anyway. Is there any additional spy capability that comes with a balloon at 60, 40, 20,000 feet, or should we just throw the country open because they've got spy satellites? It made no sense to me. What do you think of that claim?
I think it's totally bogus, to use a gentler term than the one that came to my mind. I can't comment on the specific capabilities, but imagine this. Okay, let's just say this was completely innocuous, or it had limited collection capability. In fact, let's just say it couldn't collect anything that you couldn't get with commercial imagery and $10. Well, it doesn't take a massive stretch of your imagination to think about how they could use such a balloon in a wartime scenario, either to confuse us, to get inside our OODA loop, our decision-making cycle, or potentially to weaponize a balloon like this.
OODA loop is observe, orient, decide, and act, by the way, for the benefit. You just broke the rule.
But, Hugh, you should know, in my first hearing as chairman of the Cyber and Innovation Subcommittee on Armed Services, I outlined the 3 commandments that we have to follow, and one of them is thou shalt not use acronyms or jargon. So I'm
like
trying.
OODA? Like OODA.
Like OODA. OODA loop is something that's attributed to the great John Boyd, who was a fighter pilot who revolutionized the military. But as a Marine, we adopted Boyd as an honorary Marine, and so we used the jargon. But my point is this: even if this particular balloon had limited intelligence collection value, you got to think about this in terms of one key part of an overall architecture that the PLA could use in a wartime scenario in order to get inside our decision-making cycle, or in order to identify targets for the PLA rocket force to strike. And there was a great Financial Times article that talked about how this is already being incorporated into PLA rocket force doctrine, how in 2018 there was a video of a balloon that actually had missiles on it that has subsequently disappeared from Chinese social media. So I don't buy that dismissing of it. And it also contradicts the narrative now, which is, oh my gosh, this is an intelligence bonanza. We're geniuses for letting this thing drift over the United States so as to shoot it down over the Atlantic and collect it again. So it doesn't make any sense.
Last question. I had Senator Fisher on to scare my audience about the Chinese strategic forces buildup. Are you worried that balloon array, which drifted specifically to Montana and other triad fields of strategic nuclear weaponry, that they are gaining the capability to jam and disable our strategic forces via information interjection, that they can screw up our circuitry, they can blow the fuses, they can be like Dwayne and throw the power off? Do they have the ability to sort of EMP on a localized basis and stop us from deploying weaponry?
Short answer is I don't yet know if they have that level of capability, but it does strike me as a coincidence on the level of, or maybe almost on the level of a pandemic emerging in Wuhan near the Wuhan Institute of Virology, that these things were spotted near Malmstrom and some of our most sensitive military bases. In other words, I don't think it was a coincidence, particularly because the first incident, based on public reporting, they had the ability to control the direction and the flight path, which may have not been the same for incidents 2, 3, and 4. One thing is absolutely certain to me. Putting aside the balloon for a second, they are going to target our domestic infrastructure with cyber weapons if we find ourselves in a hot war over Taiwan. And so, if nothing else, this incident should hammer home to the American people that this isn't just an over there problem. This is a right here at home problem. And in
Right
the world
now.
we live, you can't just sort of ignore problems just because you think they're thousands of miles away.
Quick exit, Chairman Gallagher. Is the national news media paying attention to the select committee on the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party?
Not to the extent necessary, I think. But the good news is when we come back into session on the 27th, we're going to start sprinting now that we've gotten all the behind the scenes stuff taken care of. Now that we have Democrats, we're going to have our first hearing on the night of the 28th. So stay tuned for that. We're going to try and
Didn't know that.
Posed by the Chinese Communist Party.
I hope every network carries 228. It's going to be a hearing. Is Fox, is CNN going to cover the hearing?
We're going to try and make that happen. Some networks are not quite as attuned to this issue as they were to the January 6th.
I'm not going to tune into MSNBC. That's not going to happen. Chairman Mike Gallagher, thank you as always. You're late, but like the Packers, you show up, at least for the game. May not be on time, but you show up for the game. Not in the Super Bowl, though. Chairman Mike Gallagher, always a pleasure.